became terrified with the tackling the Beatles. I jumped into it. The press release went out, and suddenly on the internet, it was like this kind of seismic thing. The Beatles, Ron Howard, will he blow it? That was the undercurrent.
For me, I was looking for a subject for a feature documentary for all of 2 or 3 days, and then I saw these photographs on the BBC, a photo essay online, and I knew immediately that I'd found my subject. But no, I think the will to make a film probably precedes finding any subject.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, sometimes I've thought this, that sometimes, it's like certain books where you don't choose it, it kind of chooses you. I've had that feeling with documentaries, and certainly with my film, The Hard Stop, I was looking for a film to make, a documentary that had a bit of political bite to it. And they say be careful what you wish for, but certainly I think I found it with The Hard Stop, given the subject matter, about this young man who lost his life, and the subsequent riots that happened in 2011 and became part of British history.
For me, I'm a lifelong career director of scripted material, and directed my first movie at 23. I'm 62 now, and I've been doing it since. So I love telling stories, and I love documentaries, but I was frankly just assumed I couldn't make a documentary, that it would be silly for me to try. I admire the medium, so I'm the rookie here, in this situation. Thank you. But I've been kind of I'm always trying to stretch, always trying to push myself in various ways. Always a little bit fascinated. Would talk to friends of mine, who did both, and I thought did it well, and it was sort of a fluke. It was just kind of a perfect gap in my schedule. I was finishing up post-production on Rush, this movie about Formula One racing that I was doing. I was in post, and I had a little window, and this Jay-Z documentary opportunity came along, and he was going to do a music festival in Philadelphia. It was the first one, and they just wanted to kind of cover it. And the opportunity came my way because he'd done some work at Imagine, and I did, and I just thought, wow, I don't know, I don't have much time to think about it. And Jonathan Demme, who's a friend of mine and on the board of this place, Jacob Burns Film Center. I don't know if you guys know that place. And I said, well, tell me about the documentary thing. And he said, just do it. Just jump in, have your ideas, but know that the story's going to talk to you. And I did it, and I wound up having a really great experience. So when the Beatles opportunity came my way, I wanted more of that. And I have discovered that there are a lot of similarities, which I've been pleased to discover. But it is that excitement of discovery, which there is even more of that, in all honesty, with 8 Days a Week. Late interviews coming in that sort of changed the story. This woman, Kitty Oliver, came in and really highlighted the stand that the Beatles took on segregation in the South. And that was, we knew it was there, it was in our story, but suddenly we had this interview that made it almost central to that segment of the story. And so that's exciting, and that's totally unlike scripted. So for me, I've really, really enjoyed it. I had great collaborators, Paul Crowder, Mark Monroe, Nigel Sinclair, all experienced documentarians.
Yeah, that is I think the joy of the medium is not knowing what's going to happen. Yeah. And for Elyse and I mean, we're especially excited in the documentary genre specifically about the kind of films that you watch unfold. So really getting into the verite experience. But of course, you never really know if the story is going to be there.
Yeah.
But that's part of the fun, I think.
Yeah, it was often said that if you know how the story is going to end, you haven't made a good documentary. It's a part of the journey is discovering, and I mean, as in our film, it was, when we started out, Anthony had just entered the New York mayoral's race, and everybody was discounting him, that he would have no shot at being a mayor. And then in 6 weeks, he was at the top of the polls. And then he had a sexting scandal erupted, and our entire film just changed. And it became about what it meant to be at the center of a media firestorm. But yeah, it's a wild journey. Someone once described the difference as it being like a safari, where you're just like, you're on this adventure and you're seeing different things. The documentaries that I was drawn to were these sort of verite films that you were following a character on a journey. And Josh and I just shared that passion for those kinds of films, like The War Room. And when we got this access to Anthony, we just knew we had found our story.
I got to ask a question. Did he balk? I mean, did you feel like you were going to lose your subject when it suddenly went from a celebratory piece to an underdog story to a...
It definitely became a little bit more tricky, for sure. I mean, the story changed from what he certainly was hoping it would be, and what we thought. We thought we were getting this incredible comeback story, and then it became this other thing, and it definitely was a little bit trickier to kind of stay in the room. There was this moment right after the scandal broke halfway through the campaign, when I was in the back seat with him. We were pulling up to a campaign stop, and you could see out the car window just a throng of cameras waiting just to pounce on him as he got out. And he goes to exit the car, and he goes to open the door, takes a breath, turns to me and goes, "Well, this is working out pretty well for you, huh, Josh?" and then off he goes, right?
Wow.
So, I mean, he had this wonderful awareness of the process.
Yeah.
But it was definitely changed things.
We knew that we had some pretty sensational material. We had the moment with Anthony and his wife Huma when they're in the room as the scandal broke, and we knew this was extraordinarily sensational. So what we wanted to do and what we wrestled with in the edit was to have that material but contextualize it with a larger theme, which for us was about how our politics has become about entertainment, which we are seeing very much right now with President Trump. And our story sort of had that, where you saw political coverage just being about tweets and sensational one-liners, and that was a theme that we wanted to flesh out.
It's funny, when we were making the film, this was 2013, so this is 4 years ago, and we thought that one of the challenges would be making sure it felt relevant to today, when it was released, and of course that hasn't been as much of a challenge as we thought.
Yeah.
I knew early on that with the Eagle Huntress I had kind of a strong female empowerment angle. But it goes back to what you were saying. I had a nice analogy, with documentary, it's like you make a film with a compass, not necessarily with a map. So I did. I went in thinking, okay, this is a strong female empowerment, and I saw other characters out there in the world, in the fictional world, Khaleesi and Katniss Everdeen, and I thought, oh yeah, well here's the real kind of mother of dragons. But then ultimately, that fell by the wayside. It just became really a film about a dad and his daughter. And the female empowerment angle is still there, but I didn't feel the need to bubble it up or bring it to the surface in a way that beat people over the head. It just sort of is in there, and you just let the audience, I think, close that circle.
It's such an interesting time, because I think everybody is looking at almost everything, except maybe the purest kind of escapism, and saying what's their political position.
What's the parallel?
Just looking for it, and certainly in the documentary world, the audience is it's how do you actually reach those undecideds, and get them to watch and pay attention, and that is one of the virtues of I think smart escapist movie and television making can actually, of course, do a lot to just soften people's sense of what they believe in and what they accept, and maybe you know, just kind of lay the groundwork for then you know, either news or documentary or something like that coming along and really making a point. You know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I really like this conversation. I mean, you know, in respect to my film, The Hard Stop, you know, obviously the overall theme is, or story, is about an unarmed black man being shot by the police here in Britain. And so, you know, the sort of, I guess, documentary purpose of it was to say, well, this is, you know, an injustice, and this is something that shouldn't happen. But, you know, in actually making the film, it's not, you know, the film, The Hard Stop is not really a polemical film. It's actually about these two characters, you know, his surviving friends, who, and what they go through following his death, following their friend's death. And, you know, it's, in that sense, you know, it's like what you were saying, you know, it's political, but it's actually a story of these two guys really going through human emotions, you know, bereavement and anger and sorrow. But they're also, they're kind of, you know, they're complex characters, and they're quite cool. I discovered, and what really attracted me to make a film, and they're quite quirky guys. They've got a great sense of humour. And I think that's something that I've always found been really happy about, in a sense, with The Hard Stop, is that I've seen audiences kind of quite surprised by the fact that it's actually quite funny in parts.
Right.
And you know, to me, that's something that's always important, because you know, you're trying to convey a message and say something about you know, a social political situation, but you know, it's not to say necessarily I felt, oh, it's important to make this entertaining. But you know, at the same time, I kind of think you know, you don't. It's like what Michael Moore said. You know, don't just make documentaries. You know, tell stories. Engage people like that.
Well, entertainment is something that I've you know, I've obviously thought a lot about. But it's what is entertainment, and of course, initially you think, well, it's laughs, or it's a good scare, or you know, those are the most overtly entertaining things. But I always think the real definition is that you're engrossed. And what engrosses us? Well, surprises, you know, and connection. So if you connect with the characters, whether it's scripted or whether it's on the documentary side, you know, and you begin to understand something, and you're a little bit surprised by what you're seeing. The difference is that a screenwriter and a director can get together and sort of say, what would be surprising and interesting? And I've yet to make a documentary where you don't sort of know the story. I mean, I guess the Jay-Z one was just kind of a let's shoot a lot, and we did find some plot lines and things that surprised me and was fun. But I became terrified with the you know, tackling the Beatles. I jumped into it because Nigel Sinclair brought it to me, and he was a part of Rush, and I really liked him, and Nigel's had some experience producing some really great music documentaries. And I sort of thought, yeah, why not? I had fun on the Jay-Z thing. And then it was like, it was the press release went out, and suddenly on the internet it was like this kind of seismic thing. The Beatles, documentary, Ron Howard, will he blow it? That was the undercurrent, you know. Don't fuck it up. I thought was kind of the subtext of it all.
It's so precious to so many people.
I heard people down. Yeah, it was playing at the IOC, but my parents lived downtown, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, it's there, Ron Howard."
So
there was like the line.
I was
good marketing.
I was very relieved, that, but the big challenge was, you know, what can we discover about the story, you know, and that was what was interesting, and to me, and it came about because they had some new fan footage, and they had concert footage, and they had some new soundboards that they could now digitize, and they could give you a performance feeling, and that's really how it began. I got hooked into the story of this journey. They even said, well, we only want to do the touring years. We don't want to do the whole complete story. That's, you know, we only want to focus on the touring years, and as Sir Paul says, you know, I want to remind people that it's we were a great little band. And so that was the sort of the foundation and the jumping off place. And at first I thought, well, you're only telling part of the story, I don't know. And then I began to see it in structural terms, and I said, oh, it's kind of a gauntlet they're running. You know, it's kind of in order to get to there, they had to get through here, And it surprised
Certainly got
me.
your focus.
But you know, like that, I heard you doing an interview on the radio, and you were talking about the fact that, you know, they were touring through the South, but they actually refused to play in, you know, segregated theatres, and I just never heard that. And you know, I just thought to myself, well, if that was a Hollywood drama fiction, would that have become part of the story? I mean, almost definitely not.
Well, I think if it was Hollywood fiction, if it was fiction, you might think it's almost too good to be true.
Right.
Like would it, you know,
Right.
would a pop band at the height, trying to make money, this is how they make their money touring, would they really not do it?
Yeah.
Right.
But they really didn't do it.
Yeah.
And they really didn't think twice about it. And if there's anything that surprised me about the whole thing, I didn't know too much about that. I knew they were politicized later. They were almost drawn into it, you know. And John was more willing to throw himself in there. But they all kind of had to. It was a part of the era. But they led the way in many ways. But the thing that probably surprised me is that here are these guys, and they functioned with a level of integrity that they just follow their instincts. And I don't know if it's Liverpool or just those four guys or what it was, but there's just an earthy, honest commitment to integrity. And they followed it in their music and they followed it in their lives, and for the most part they made great decisions with that. And I love discovering that about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about sort of the surprise factor being central to the entertainment. Like we had obviously kind of the surprise of how the story unfolded in real time, but then we also had, I think, more fundamentally, just this was really gratifying as we were showing the movie over the last year, kind of blowing up people's preconceptions, right? So there was so much, and maybe this is somewhat similar with the Beatles, but there was so much, that people brought to Anthony Weiner's story, having lived through the headlines and whatever judgments they might have made of him through this scandal, and then to get a chance to kind of question some of those judgments and give people an opportunity to see that it isn't quite as simple as they might have thought. I think that was probably the most interesting and exciting part of the story for us.
You know, the guys that I was filming with, for at least the first 3 months, they weren't sure if I might not be, an undercover cop, which I kind of took as a compliment at the time, but then they had reason to be very wary of anyone, who fell into the category of media because of the way in which the death of their friend was represented in the media, so it did take a while to gain their trust, but they wanted to do something for their dead friend. And, obviously I wanted to make a film about something that I thought mattered, but I also eventually realized that I wanted to make a film about these two people, these two personalities. So
take on that mantle of responsibility, don't you?
You do, yeah, you do. And then there's I think what you said, about your politician, and he, just the fact that he had that awareness to pretty much turn around to you and say, well, the worse it's getting for me, the better it's kind of getting for your film, isn't it? And but I think my guys understood that as well, and there was because the film we made ended up spanning 3 years, and that's because the court case and the Mark Duggan inquest took so long to happen, which was really horrible for the family to go through that for so long. But that protracted situation for them kind of became one of the sort of, I think, strengths of the film, because it spanned this period of time.
It's funny, isn't it? I was very lucky with my subject. I mean, this was my first feature film, but I made a lot of shorts before, documentary stuff. And I did all the things that I usually do. You don't. When you meet your subject for the first time, you don't have cameras around, and you set out to build a rapport. But I got very lucky in that, the day that I found this nomadic Kazakh tribe on the steppe, the father, I sort of sat down nervously thinking, pitching the idea of maybe making a film, and that's when her father stood up and said, "Oh well, we're going to go and steal an eagle from the side of a mountain this afternoon." He said, "Do you want to film that?" And I said, "Yeah, let's film that. That sounds good." And that became the Act One, the first afternoon of filming. But I do think it's interesting what you say about getting past that in your case, that 3-month barrier or whatever. I always tend to find that people, generally speaking, want their stories to be told. They're interested in unloading. Once they're set that you're the right person, that you're not out to, and it's not even about doing them a favor or being in their corner necessarily. They just want to know that you're even-handed and that you're fair. And once you get past that, it's floodgates open, and they just unload. And I feel like I've yet to meet somebody who is reticent, consistently all the way through.
I mean, when you're doing a documentary and it's it's a subject matter which involves pain and trauma and people who are going through bereavement.
Yeah.
What I've learned is that you can make the mistake of thinking that this is someone going through something that's really hard, and maybe I shouldn't be filming that. But once you've gained and that contract, between you has been established, then that's exactly what you should be filming, because that's what they want.
That's why you're there in their eyes sometimes.
Exactly, and it's, I kind of learned that. I think actually as a student, when I was making a film about parents who had lost their son as a death in police custody is one of this horrible statistic. And she'd just come out of lobbying at Scotland Yard, and she came out crying, and I just thought, oh, she's crying, and I kind of I've kind of put the camera down, kind of thing, to console her. And actually, what I've realised afterwards in edit is that is exactly what I'm supposed to be capturing, that pain, and that she was going
giving
through,
her
that sense of
justice that she hasn't received.
I'm glad I had that learned that lesson as a student.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, this question and this relationship that we had with Anthony, actually became a meta theme in our film, because one of the first questions is always asked is like, why did he allow you to film, especially when the scandal broke? And the answer that we usually have is what Anthony actually says at some point in the film, is like, look, I don't regret letting you film me, but I just wanted to be viewed as the full person that I was and not a punchline. And that was certainly our intention with the film, was to offer a human portrait, and I think people come away having a more full perspective of him, a complex perspective, and I think some people, it runs the gamut in how they come across and how he comes across to them, but that was what we wanted. And I think but it was this question of Anthony and allowing us to film became the sort of meta film. We open it being like, why, I can't believe I'm doing a documentary, and we close it and we have that question that Josh asks in the film. So it was something that we knew we wanted to raise to the audience as well.
When I've done scripted movies about real subjects, I think probably 4 of the 6 of those, the subjects were alive, and we talked to them, and they were there for research and so forth. And I'd have these kind of strange experiences where I would sit with them and screen the movie and let them see it. They never had any editorial control, but of course, and it has to be utterly bizarre seeing some actor playing you and whatever it is. And I always feel like it's a pretty out of body experience. I was very relieved, by the reaction from Paul and Ringo and in this. And I did notice something, that the first interview was fine, but having looked at all the other interviews, it was more or less the stories you kind of had heard. And then the second time we sat down with them, each of them separately, they had seen some bits of the movie, and they kind of saw the tone we were going for, and they really opened up more. And is that a common I had two questions for you guys. Is that a common thing that that interviews get easier as you go along with people? And secondly, what's it been like when you've shown your movies to subjects, or whether you're there or not?
Yeah.
Well, in our case, Anthony actually hasn't seen it yet, as far as we know. Or that's what he said. We actually offered to show it to him before it was finished, and before we premiered at Sundance, and he didn't want to see it. And he actually said no to a couple offers to watch the film, and then he kind of chose, for his reasons, to kind of keep his distance from the film after it was released, which we respected.
Sure.
So we really don't know, even to this day, what he really thinks about it. Yeah.
But in terms of your second question, I do think, Josh did 95% of the shooting and really became embedded. And I think that you can see from earlier footage in the beginning, the first month versus like the last month, the openness that he had was there. I mean, it's just a relationship you get to know. Josh became a part of this experience, and you see that in the film. Yeah.
I mean, with my guys, I kind of remember, like after a few days of filming with them, they were like, because of the technology, they're like, all right, let's have a look at that.
Yeah.
Well, how did I look? And you can wind it back, and I constantly had them over my shoulder.
Don't like the framing there, mate.
Reviewing the rushes. So it was
Really?
a
That's your choice?
process.
They ever say, let me do it again. I can do that. I can be funnier.
Just realised that the trailer certainly helped, because we had to, we had to assemble a 3-minute trailer or so to try and get the rest of the funding that we needed, but that 3-minute trailer served a few different functions in terms of attracting more funding for the film, but also actually helping the contributors to really feel and get a sense of what we're trying to do with this, and the tone of it, and and that I think was quite nice, because then you're not making a film about people, you're making a film with people, who happen to be in front of the
That's a nice way of thinking.
part of the process.
Yeah.
They kind of start to get a sense of where we're going with this, and because my guys for a while, God bless them, was saying, well, why are you focusing so much on us, and you're following us everywhere, and you seem to be interested in us, just going to the bathroom, and this is an important subject matter, and don't you want to interview some important people, some politicians, and some, and even go and talk to some high-ranking police officers, and it took a while for me to convey to them that actually I'm making an observational film, and it's about you, it's about your voice, and that this, guiding principle for this film is this Martin Luther King quote, which is that a riot is a language of the unheard. But for them, there was that underlying, thing that they've grown up with, which is our voice is not that important.
Yeah. Gosh.
And aren't you going to get some Trevor McDonald or someone to do the voiceover? And no, it's not. It's going to be about you.
Yeah.
So I think them seeing the trailer sort of helped with that.
Yeah, my definitely got easier. Definitely. I mean, I was dealing with a 13-year-old girl as my principal subject, so she was shy to begin with. But it's time spent. It took a couple of visits before she started even really talking in full sentences, and going that layer deeper as well. I almost think sometimes with interviews, I don't know if you find this, but you've almost got to let your subjects exhaust themselves, of everything that they think that you want to hear, or they think that they want to say, and then you almost start again. Then you might as well just then turn on the camera, because that's when you get to the loot. It took a few visits, and with family now. I mean, she's coming to my wedding next year and things. I mean, it's like it's very close at this point. But they had not seen the film until we premiered at Sundance. I'd shown them little selects and bits and pieces on my iPad as I would go backwards and forwards, different trips. Go back and earn some more money, and then come back and film another sequence and show them the last one. And that always got them excited. That kept them in, it kept them engaged. It kept them thinking, okay, we're doing something here. This is progressing. But then that moment at Sundance when they actually saw the full thing, I I'll never forget that. You know, my nervousness. Luckily, they liked it, and there were tears, and everybody was happy. It was, in a way, they become your most important audience. You know, I was a lot less fearful about the future of the film and the trajectory of it after they sort of enjoyed it.
Did you consider showing it to them before you premiered at Sundance?
I did, and there were bits that I kept back from them, actually. There were bits that I deliberately, there were the criticisms that she'd received from the elders. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't want them to know about, well, I mean, she knew about them and her father had insulated them from some of them, but I didn't want her to see that in all its filmed closeness, you know, in all of its veracity, you know, before she had accomplished what it was that she was so determined to accomplish. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they only saw, she only saw that when the film was finished and we were premiering. Mm-hmm. And they laughed, you know, they loved that bit because she'd proved all the old men wrong, you know. So she was giggling away, and yeah.
You know, when you've made a film about people from a quite specific community.
Yep.
Because, you know, my film's about people from a specific community, Tottenham. This is where the young man, Mark Duggan, came from, and, you know, they come from quite a, I suppose you could say, notorious housing estate. You'd call them projects over there. And, you know, we showed it to anyone, we showed it to that community from this particular housing estate called Broadwater Farm, and also to the family of Mark Duggan, the man who was killed. And to say the least, I was very, very nervous at that screening. And it was really surprising because, you know, like I mentioned before, there's moments of humour in the film, they're quirky. But this audience seemed to be laughing throughout the whole film.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I just thought, well, this is not a comedy. You know?
Yeah, and
we know that.
I know
put
that.
in a few moments of humour.
Yeah, like, you're not supposed to laugh at that bit. I remember those feelings.
Right.
Yeah.
But what someone explained to me afterwards is like, you know, and he's one of the sort of, I guess, the community leaders from there, and he explained that actually, look, these people are people. We don't need a filmmaker to come along and make a documentary to show us the hardship of our lives and the tragedies that we've been through in this community, because this is a community that have suffered these sort of deaths at the hands of the police going back to the 1980s, and you know, and the riots going back to the 1980s. And so we know all this, and we don't need a film to convey it. In fact, you know, seeing your film, what a lot of people just find is just, it's kind of a pleasure and a joy to see their people that they know, they've grown up with, up there on the big screen. And, you know, because the film spans 2011 going back to 1985, it's also, for them, a lot of the time, it's just hilarious seeing people they know who are now sort of elders in the community, what they looked like in 1985, and, you know, as young people kind of thing. Right. So it was, you know, it was an eye-opener for me. I just hadn't really expected that.
Suddenly film was for them, right? I imagine, I felt a bit of that, but obviously very different context, but like, I felt like, it sounds like they had, film wasn't for them, and now suddenly film, they had access to film, they were on the screen.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I think they've seen themselves on the screen before because of the, again, as I say, quote unquote, notoriety of this particular area and this community. They've seen themselves on the news.
Different context.
They've seen themselves in the archive, and, you know, that sort of context. But seeing themselves in, I suppose, a documentary of this sort, an observational story of this sort, which is actually just about them, about two of their own people, and, you know, kind of warts and all. And I think that maybe was where the sort of, you know, the novelty element came into play. And like I say, it was just, I really didn't know what to expect in terms of reaction.
It's funny, I feel like it's almost a rule of screening documentaries for the subjects is the thing that you're like really worried about is never the thing.
The one
it always like sees on something.
Yeah,
it's always surprising.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, right?
That's very true.
It's like giving a film to an audience, and suddenly it's like, oh, I didn't realize that was funny. I never saw that as funny.
So true.
It's like, oh, you're worried about the way you look in that moment. And
You had to,
that's-
show, had to show my bald
Right,
spot.
exactly.
Yeah, that's it. Come on, what? Yeah.
That's right.
From a filmmaking perspective, I and we have always been really sort of inspired and excited by the verite tradition of the '60s, and filmmakers like Pennebaker and Maisels and Wiseman, and I mean, those are the films, the documentaries that I first saw that really made me think, I want to do this. And then specifically The War Room, which is a little bit later, but it was pretty exciting for us to have made a film that's kind of in that sort of canon of documentary films.
Yeah, that's right. I think, I had done a lot of documentaries for PBS. I had done an investigative piece about the trial of Saddam Hussein, but I really wanted to do a documentary following a complex character and just diving in and looking at the documentaries in that tradition. I mean, Laura Poitras's The Oath. I mean, just watching this, complex character driving through the streets, I was just like, I want to make that, and it was exciting to be able to fulfill that.
Well, for me, as I said, it's years of working in scripted, material, or even as a kid actor, and growing up in that environment. But I also always had a fascination with journalism. And I always thought, when I was sort of in high school and just beginning college, if I wasn't able to transition into my dream of either becoming a director or continue as an actor in an adult career, I probably would go into journalism. So that's when I began sort of paying attention to documentaries, and it's sort of that era. But I was, there was Gimme Shelter was, and this great one about Marjo Gortner. It was fantastic, and that I remember, really captivated me. And so then I became, sort of a fan and a follower. But for me, it's actually scratching an old itch, and I haven't done anything, controversial or really exploratory, or in that way where you're going out to cover a story. And maybe someday, I hope. It'd be great.
My earliest, I think, obsessions in terms of films were drama fictions. But, one of the first films that I was obsessed with, I literally had to watch it almost on a nightly basis, just so I could go to sleep, was Mean Streets. And but Mean Streets, when you look at, for me, actually, it's kind of like a bit of a documentary, there's one scene that I just was obsessed by in it, which is where, he films an Italian, I think it's The Feast, and, it's obviously he's filmed this real event that happens in New York, and as in a documentary style, but he's put his actors in it. He's put De Niro and a young De Niro and a young Keitel in it. And I always thought, wow, I'd love to do something like that. And I think he's, that it's born out of the same sort of thing of, the Maisels brothers and this, using lightweight cameras, handheld, and following people around on the street. And I just always thought, wow, I'd love to do something like that. But I guess, I got into documentaries because that was the closest thing to, I guess, what I was doing at art college, using small lightweight cameras and Super 8s and 16mm. But, I'd like to think that in some ways, the hard stop, it takes a bit of inspiration from something like Mean Streets, and just that, you've got two characters in my film who are, where one of them's, I suppose, like the Harvey Keitel character in Mean Streets, where he's the reflective one, and he's the one with the voiceover, and he's the one who's kind of soulful and but then his best mate is the De Niro character, who's this live wire, who's just constantly sort of on the go, and you don't quite know what he's going to do. And in some ways, it's not something that you can't script a documentary, but you look at what you've got, and that's what we did with Hard Stop. And I realised, I've got these two characters who, because you don't want two characters doing the same thing, and one of them is this guy who, I guess the explosion's already happened before the film starts, and he's being accused of starting the UK riots of 2011. And so he tells his whole story in voiceover, and you know, he's got, and his story, he takes us back to 1985, whereas the other character is his best friend and also a childhood friend of the man who was killed by the police. He's the live wire, and he's the one who's constantly running around, and he's constantly, you know, you jump in a car with him and suddenly he's racing down the M1 kind of thing. And so anyway, I'm making a very long-winded way of saying that my earliest influences were drama fictions. But I think drama, if we're talking about Scorsese and Mean Streets, I think we're talking about drama fiction that was very much born out of a kind of documentary kind of ethos.
I worked as an actor in the movie American Graffiti, and Haskell Wexler shot it, and he did a lot of commercials, and he was, of course, an A+ Academy Award cinematographer, but he loved documentaries. And of course, he directed a movie that was scripted in a way, or improvised, but fiction.
Medium cool.
But it was all around the Chicago, convention, the riots, medium cool. And he used to talk a lot about the excitement of just kind of how the adventure of trying to stage those scenes in and around the real stuff.
I'm all mixed up. I learned documentary interviewing from British doc directors, Anthony Wonke, Anthony Phillipson, Marta Shaw, David Clues, like all these sort of classic interview things. But then I'm a sucker for beautiful backdrops, and I think just because something's true doesn't mean that it can't also be really beautiful. And I grew up on a real diet of westerns and classic American films with my dad, and so I wanted the Huntress to be cinematic and to be beautiful. And we didn't have much money. I made the film for about 100,000. I used my life savings and a loan from the bank. But but I threw the kitchen sink at it. We took the drones. We built a crane to make it. I wanted to do justice to the landscape. I wanted to do justice to the remarkable characters that I met, and I wanted people to feel how vast and cinematic a place and how fairy tale-esque this girl's unfolding story was. So, and I made commercials for a decade, so I like a good production quality. I like a nice finish, and so yeah, bringing in the real interviews, the actual fact, but then making it immersive, so it does take you away. So you do lose yourself for an hour and a half, because even though we're doing docs, I think we're all in that competition for time now, right? Yeah. It's like it could be a scripted film, it could be a documentary, it could be a video game, it could be 8 hours of a miniseries. It doesn't matter. You're on a playing field now where somebody's clicking through, and what are you going to do to bring them in?
And how are you going to hold their attention?
Yeah.
Quite, yeah. So, yeah. I think put it all together.
That's right.
Been shivering all the way through that.
I said, am I nervous? I don't think
It looked like I'm just nervous to be sitting next to her. It's a big deal.